Hey guys, welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. Today we're actually brewing a Citra SMaSH beer. And you may be wondering, what is a SMaSH beer? Well, SMaSH stands for
single malt and single hop.
And it's really a good way for brewers to kind of get used to and get a good idea of how or whether they like particular grains or hops, or how they change based on which yeast you use, which grains you use, when you add hops into the addition, earlier in the boil for more bitter, later in the boil, dry hopping, etc. So it's a good way to play around with different grains, different malt that you like, and different hop styles. And so I try to mess around with ones that I haven't done all that much, or use a different yeast and the same grains and hops to see how it changes versus one that I've done previously. So it's kind of a good way for home brewers to kind of get to know ingredients a little bit better, because you're singling out a particular malt and singling out a particular hop. So for this one, I'm actually going to be using Maris Otter malt. I'm going to be milling this up. I'm actually also going to be using whole leaf citra hops, which most people use pellets, and we can kind of go over a little bit of the differences between that. But this is the first time I'm going to be doing that with a SMaSH beer, second time overall using whole cone hops, so that'll be interesting. And I'm also actually using Kveik voss yeast as well. So kind of three different elements in here, two of which will be fairly new to me. I've used Maris Otter in a lot of different SMaSH beers, but for this case, the whole leaf citra hops will be new, and then also using that voss Kveik yeast. And a little bit about that yeast is it likes to be fermented at high temperatures. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get going. But first, let's get our brew day going, and we'll go from there. For this recipe, I'm using 10.5 pounds of Maris Otter. Got my mill all set up, bucket to catch it. We're gonna get these grains milling. To figure out your mash volume and temperature, you'll want to take the temperature of your grain just using your thermometer. I use Brewger, BREWGR.com. They have a calculator on here, the Mash and Sparge Infusion Water Calculator. Put in your grain amount. Your grain temp in this case is 78. Your mash temperature, we're going to be doing that at 152. And then your mash thickness and boil time. And once you put all that in there, this is for a 5-gallon batch. On the other side, it comes out and gives you your calculated totals. So we're going to be doing a strike water of 3.76, and then a batch sparge with our batch volume being 4.63. It also gives you the temperature. So we're right at about 162.39. All right, as you can tell, we got 3.75 gallons going into the kettle to get warmed up. Quick tip, if you are having trouble hitting your mash temperature and you want to make sure that everything's going to be right spot on, I suggest adding a little bit of boiling water into your mash tun a little bit ahead of time. So if you keep this out in your garage and it's cold or hot or vice versa, sometimes your mash temperatures can be affected. So either if it's cool on a cool day, that's not the case today, but I would put in a little bit of boiling water, warm that up, or just go about a half a degree more on your strike water just to make sure that you've hit that temperature. I'd rather be a little bit over on temperature than under, because it's harder to raise that up. You can always add a few ice cubes if you're over your mash temp. All right, I got my 3.75 gallons of water in there. Gonna add my water additions, which I use some gypsum, calcium chloride, and a little bit of pH stabilizer to help get that pH right on. Now I'm going to add my grains. Go ahead and pour those in, make sure they don't get clumped up. And mix around, get rid of any dough balls that you have. All right, got everything stirred in. Let's see where we're at. See how good our water temperature calculator was. Should be sitting at about 152, 151. $152 right on the. All right, while your mash is doing its thing, don't forget to do your thing. First rule of home brewing: always enjoy a home brew. This is a blackberry sour. If you haven't watched the video on how to make a kettle sour, I suggest going to do so. It will change your life. Also, at this time, you're also going to want to pull out your yeast to make sure that gets all warmed up to about room temperature, so we can go ahead and pitch that when we get done cooling the beer. Cheers. All right, now that all the magic's happened, we have done our mash for 60 minutes. We're going to now boil off and try to get about 2.2 gallons, which is what Brugger had said should be our first runnings. All right, we got right at 2.2 gallons for our first runnings. I'm dumping in the sparge water, which is at about 170 degrees with my water additions. Now we'll stir this back up, and then we will let it sit for 20 minutes. All right, 20-minute batch sparge rest over. It is now draining into here, into the kettle. I'm gonna fire this up here in a minute. We should be getting at about 6 gallons, 6.7 gallons according to our mash and sparge calculator that we used. So we're right about 5 gallons. Should get a couple more yet, and then we will take our hydrometer reading using the refractometer. All right, we got this thing flame on. The reading is right at about 6.75 gallons, which is right about where we wanted to be. I took a sample for my hydrometer reading, which we're using a refractometer. I actually use a little medicine syringe here to grade a little bit of sample after it's mixed up, make sure that we get a good reading on that. And then I also add some firm cap into the here, which is like about that much, which is about a half a teaspoon or so. That'll help. And you can already see the cap kind of moving off the top. That'll help as it gets closer to boiling to prevent boilovers. All right, so we got our hydrometer. I put a couple of the drops after I let the wort cool down a little bit on the lens there, and we're gonna see where we're at. We're shooting for a original gravity, or excuse me, pre-boil gravity of 1042. So we'll see where we're at here. See if we can get it in the lens. And look at that, right at 142-ish. So we hit that pretty spot on pre-boil gravity. So pretty happy. All right, we're gonna wanna start while the kettle is heating up to boil. We're gonna wanna start our weighing out our hops for our hop additions. In this case, I'm gonna be adding 1 ounce of the whole leaf citra hops at 45 minutes, at 10 minutes, at 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna dry hop 1.5 ounces for 5 days, just at the end of fermentation actually. So I'm gonna add it where there's a few points left in fermentation. So let's weigh out 1 ounce. In this case, whole leaf hops are a lot more volume in a bowl, obviously, than the pellet hops are. So in this case, we're gonna wanna have a bigger bowl to measure these out. Also, I err on adding a few extra when it calls for 1 ounce, just because, or a few extra cones anyway, because it does have a slightly less surface area there versus pellet hops. So just something I do. You don't have to, depending on your recipe, but in this case, here's what the whole leaf hops look like. So you can tell the whole cones there. And so they have a little bit less surface area, but they smell absolutely delicious. All right, our boil is moving right along. We are now going to add our first addition of the citra hops. This is 1 ounce of the whole leaf citra. I have my hop spider here inside that's got all warmed up and kind of sanitizing and boiling water here. And we're gonna go ahead and dump these things in here. Making sure to get most of them in there, and then give it a good swirl in there. Make sure we get out all those oils. These are our bittering hops. In this case, at 45 minutes. All right, we are at 10 minutes. We're gonna add our 10-minute hop addition. 1 ounce of whole cone citra hops again. Throw those guys in there. Again, give it a good swirl. Getting that down into the wort, and then give the wort a good swirl. And then I always pull that hop spider up and down a couple times just to let those oils really move around inside. Little tip for someone wanting to make a real good summer beer. This Citra SMaSH would be a good one, but also if you have a really good IPA that's really citrusy anyway, throw some tangerine peels in it. I mean, real tangerine peels. You can do orange peels too, but if you can find actual tangerine peels, they're amazing. Make sure that you kind of grate off the outside of the peel rather than keeping a lot of that white pith which is the inside of the peel. But I add a bunch of that in the boil, probably like a half an ounce or so, and then about an ounce or ounce and a half, maybe even 2 ounces in the dry hop. And man, it's a fantastic beer. This is a tangerine IPA. Cheers. All right, we got the last hop addition going in at 5 minutes to end of boil. All right, I got my wort chiller in there, immersion chiller, and we're cooling these things down. I like to take and move it around a little bit. It really helps cool the wort down fast. Again, since we're using Kveik yeast, it doesn't need to get down to 60 fermentation temperatures. Actually, we're going to be fermenting this one at about 85 degrees. We're already at about 140, and we've only been in there for a few minutes. So I'm just going to try to get this as close to 90 degrees or so as possible, transfer it into my fermenter, and then we'll basically be at pitching temperature. All right, we got our worts cooled down to about 90 degrees. I am putting it in the fermenter. I use a screen for a couple different reasons. You can see some of the hop particles that I missed getting out of this hop spider. So it'll catch those and it helps aerate the beer. So it'll give it all the oxygen it needs to start the fermentation when we pitch our yeast here in a few minutes. Again, this is about 90 degrees. The Kveik yeast can be fermented anywhere between, they actually recommend for the voss 85 to 109 degrees. So way different than most fermentation. And so we're actually going to be fermenting this at 85. I might actually bump it up a couple of points, but I'm not worried about cooling it down that much because that's what it really likes, apparently. All right, we're about to take our final starting gravity reading. Did the same thing I did before, took a couple of drops, threw it on here now that it's cooled down, and we'll see where we're at. It's supposed to be, according to our brew log, 1055 expected original gravity. So let's see where we're at here. Get it in the camera. And man, we are right on the mark, 1055. All right, we got everything in our fermentation chamber starting to cool down. It's a little bit higher than 85, but that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and pitch this anyway because the voss yeast, the Kveik, really like hot temperatures. And I have way more yeast than I need. This was given to me by one of the local breweries here. And so I'm really gonna use, just a fraction of this. So not very much at all, but I'm gonna go ahead and pour that in now. Just kind of eyeballing it. For Kveik yeast, it's actually better sometimes to underpitch because the off flavors are what gets it, like the citrusy floral notes. And so stressing it out, and actually why the higher temperatures doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna maybe pour just a smidge more in there, but I'm trying to eyeball it about what it would be if it were in a vial of yeast that I would get at the store. So I think that's about it. I'm gonna give it a good shake real quick once I put the lid on there and the airlock, and we'll see how she goes. All right, everybody. That's going to wrap up our SMaSH Beer Day. I hope you guys learned something. SMaSH beers are an excellent way to play around with different types of hops, different types of grain, and different types of yeast. And so what I would recommend folks doing is just start with typical base malt, two-row or Pilsner or even Maris Otter, and then just start experimenting around. Take some hops that you normally would like or one that you've never tried. And it's a great way to really get to know the flavors of each of the different varieties of ingredients that you're using. And then also a really great way to do smaller batches of different yeast strains potentially, or just kind of mix things up. So it's helped me become a better brewer, and I hope it makes you a better brewer as well. So with that, happy brewing, and we'll see you next time.